Before we start, a quick note. This podcast is not a substitute for professional mental health care. If you need support, consider reaching out to a licensed professional. This podcast can include strong language and difficult topics. Pause if you need to. Let's get into it. I'm really glad to welcome Shep today. Shep is a queer relationship and sexuality coach and a therapist in training with a focus on non-conventional relationship structures and kink. Coming to this work from a background as a sustainability strategist, they bring an ecological lens to the workshops they lead, thinking about relationships as living systems shaped by context, care, and interdependence. Outside of their work, Shep finds their greatest joys out in nature, where a lot of that framework first took root. Shep, I'm looking forward to exploring how these perspectives shape the way you think about connection, identity, and what we tell ourselves we should want. Welcome to I Feel Like I Should.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you. So I've been starting off with an icebreaker, and if that works for you, are you ready to jump in?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, cool. So what is a song you secretly love, something that always lifts your mood, even if you wouldn't admit it to anyone?
Ooh. I don't know about a song that I wouldn't admit to anyone because I think I really try and live my life in terms of as being radically authentic as possible. But there are definitely songs that I might feel like somebody might judge me for, or like a certain group of my friends or people that I interact with. I would say like this is like a whole collection of music.
I love this.
Like my like slutty or angry lesbian, like sapphic or queer artists. And it's very pop oriented, which I never used to identify as somebody who listened to pop. And I think like often was like, oh, this is somewhat embarrassing. Reality is over the last few years, I have had so much fun listening to this genre and it really lifts my spirit. So one of the songs in that is F You in My Head, and it's by Cloudy June. And it's like really raunchy and really fun. And there's like this whole playlist of this sort of music that I love to listen to now. Like if I just need a pick me up or if I'm at the gym and I like want the upbeat energy. I used to mostly listen to EDM.
Oh, okay. Right on. I like that you're kind of breaking out into the pop side because there's a lot there.
Yeah,
And there's a reason why it's pop music and why why a lot of people listen to it, right?
totally.
Awesome. So we're gonna put that one on the playlist that we're building, which is a lot of fun. So kind of like going backwards in time, is there a song you felt like you should have loved? Maybe because everyone else did when you were growing up, or you wanted to fit in, but privately it didn't really resonate with you?
Yeah. So I think like the thing that stands out to me the most in that is less a specific song, but more like a genre and era, which I think was like some of rap and hip hop at large, but especially I remember like, and this is as I got a little bit older, like dating people who are like, oh my gosh, like the original like rap and hip hop artists are so cool and you have to listen to it. And me being like, wow, I think I get this even less. Because I think from a sound perspective, like it as rap and hip hop has evolved, it's gotten more like popified. And originally there was like kind of no pop influence. And so I think it was like very different than the like popular music I had been bred on. And on top of that, like the content and the story in that sort of music was something like I didn't relate to as somebody like socialized as a woman growing up in the city. And like, I didn't really have at that age, especially like an appreciation for the historical and cultural context that bred that genre of music.
That same time in your life, like, thinking about outside of that genre, like, the culture around you, what were other shoulds you felt like growing up?
Mm. Yeah, I think a lot of the shoulds I felt were like driven by a need to be liked and to be popular and accepted. Um, it's really interesting for me in particular as a genderqueer person who, as the older I've gotten, the more I've come into my trans identity. And when I was younger, like I felt such a deep need to be very girly and to fit in that way. And there was a part of that that was authentic. Like I was really into fashion. I still love fashion and style and clothing and the way that it can help you express your identity. But at that age, it was like, how do I do my makeup and my hair and wear heels and skirts and look as sexy as possible? And I think a lot of that was about this like need to be liked. Um, and going towards what would achieve that with my peers rather than what felt the most authentic to me.
Yeah. Could you recall, like, a moment, or a person who made those shoulds, like, feel especially real for you?
This is kind of a weird anecdote, but I think it was like maybe one of the first times I felt really aware of it. I went to Catholic school for 2 years where like a lot of that pressure felt very material. And when I was in driver's ed, it was like a mashup of students from like all over town. And I became really close friends with somebody who I ended up being friends with all through high school, who went to one of the other public schools in town. And I remember him being like, in kind of like a loving, joking way, like, you look like one of the girls out of Mean Girls. And I just remember being like, oh my God, that's so wild, but it's true because, like, the culture at the Catholic school that I went to, it was, like, perfectly manicured, juicy hoodies and skinny jeans and heels and push-up bras, and yeah, like, I looked kind of like a caricature, and then I think that was right around the time I ended up transferring back to my local public school, and, like, my style and my identity, like, really started to shift, and part of it was that image wasn't as popular in the public schools, but it also, like, I think I was coming to an age where I started to feel more comfortable, like, doing what I wanted and caring moderately less about what people thought.
Yeah, yeah, but still at that time, like, it sounds like there was an influence of that pop culture in and around you, in your space.
Totally. Yeah, like, that movie, Mean Girls, was, like, so popular, It was like it still is, I think, right? They're making a new one, like a TV show or something.
Are they really?
Yeah.
That makes me feel kinda old.
Right? Yeah.
And, like, I'm wondering, like, on top of that, like you said, like, you shifted from, like, one school to another school, and, like, how have those pressures that you felt at that time, like, shifted or changed as time has passed?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that, like, shifting schools, like, changed what was cool, and so allowed me to try different things on in terms of, like, what was even still normative, but I think also, as I mentioned, like, coincided with the beginning of, like, learning to be more authentic, and I think that that's something that I, like, struggled with a long time was the duality between, like, authenticity and the desire to conform or be liked, and I noticed that in college, and I don't think it was really until, like, late college that I really got to this point where I was like, "Okay, who am I truly, and how do I deconstruct that?" And I think part of that is, like, I originally went to art school, like, I got into state sustainability by way of working in the fashion industry, and so talk about a field that, like, has a lot of shoulds and a lot of, like, deeply embedded ideas about, like, how you should look and what was cool. And I found that so much of being a successful designer was about your persona and how you looked and how cool you were, not how creative or talented you were. So there was a lot of pressure for that, but I think that I had started on this path of being more authentic. Like, I was in art school, I was surrounded by people who were super creative, really hip looking, and I would bike to school every day in the rain in London. And I would like pack something cute in my bag, but I had this kind of like, before it was even a thing, like gorpcore style, because there was like a practicality that I like built into what I wore. And that was like part of me trying to be authentic to who I was and am rather than like completely conforming.
Yeah. And in that system that you were in, like in fashion school, what were the other influences you were feeling like internally and externally that, like you said, were pushing you to be more authentic?
I think one of the best things about working as a creative or like developing yourself as a creative as a student is authenticity is a part of it and like finding your creative spark. And that was what actually really perplexed me was the intensity of that duality that like on one hand you're encouraged to and supposed to find your authentic self and that's where your creativity should come from, and yet at the same time you're kind of being directly and indirectly told, "Oh, that's not cool. So you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't be that way." And like, I think at that point, I just had gotten to a place in my life where I was like, well, I don't want to not be authentic.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that like so much of it, like in the first year, I went to fashion school and then I dropped out and decided I wanted to do sustainability work. Um, like a lot of it is influenced by what the main designers are doing. The school is trying to produce the next most famous designer. And like I went to school with folks like Harris Reed, who is now like one of the top young designers in the world. And like you kind of watched people like that who had a very strong persona, who worked as a model, who came from wealth. And like that was kind of the world you were in. And those were the factors like influencing like what was cool.
Yeah. In those spaces, like I find this really interesting. People are trying to find themselves, right? Be authentic, but it sounds like there's a lot of pressure, like you said, to be the next best thing. And often those pressures don't come from internal forces, they come from external forces, right? Whether it's economic or societal expectations or however you're supposed to like perform in that space. So, how does someone become authentic in a space that wants you to become authentic, but in a weird way wants you to like go with the main flow?
Yeah. I think it requires like developing like a sense of not completely caring and wanting your authenticity more than you want success or to be cool or to be liked. Um, but I think a lot of it is that like the people who were most successful were the ones that their authentic self matched what was cool, you know, because there wasn't a ton of space. And I saw that like I was, like, deep in my, like, queer identity journey at the time. A lot of what I was interested in fashion was, like, gender blended style and, like, men's suiting and tailoring for women, um, and that was really cool. Like, I watched that be received well, and then all the energy that I put into the storytelling, the sustainability, the concepts around sourcing was, like, not cool. And I was
Mhm.
basically told, like, if you wanna make it, you need to take that out of your collections, don't put energy into it, and you can reincorporate it once you've made it, but that it's gonna tank your career. And that was the kind of, like, messaging that we got was like, "Oh, like, if you wanna make it, you need to lean into this, and if you're doing something else, like, you need to forget about it." And I think there were people that, like, were in my class who were maybe interested in something that, like, didn't match anything that was cool, and I don't know fully what that would have felt like, but at that point, I was like, "This is too far from the authentic me," because I was like, "I don't actually feel like I can ethically make stuff that people don't need." And so that's what drove me to drop out of school and be like, "I wanna work in the supply chain. I wanna find ways to make fashion more ethical."
Yeah. Those are pretty powerful shoulds.
Yeah,
I feel like if you want to fit in, you should be doing this.
totally.
That's really interesting. Like how have those shoulds like as you said, like working through your own gender identity, how those shoulds evolve, like what were those shoulds for you as you were trying to navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the beauty of being in fashion at that point in my life is that like most of my classmates were queer. Like I mentioned Harris Reed, who's this like very iconic, like gender androgynous person and was like one of the first people I'd ever met who looked and identified that way. And there were a lot of people in my class who were queer. I think the like creative arts attract that. But I also found when I left fashion and I stepped into like other parts of queer community, there are very clear ideas of like what a queer person should look like, what a lesbian is, and the fact that like I'm attracted to people of all genders and I like to present in feminine ways sometimes, especially as a performer, but generally I prefer to present more masculine. Like some of those things really broke the molds of kind of like what was considered socially acceptable. I think back then, I think it's getting more and more acceptable to like be queer in different ways. But, you know, if we look back at the roots and history of like the queer like liberation movement, like it wasn't really safe, period, let alone to conform less. So it was like if you were trans, like you fully transitioned. And if you're queer, you're either lesbian, gay, or straight. Like you didn't have options. And I felt the reverberations of that where there's kind of this rhetoric or mindset of like, oh, if you're bi, you're just confused, or you don't know what you want, or you're afraid of actually committing to being gay.
Mm, hmm. I'm wondering then, like in that space, how have you found your authentic voice? Like what helped settle you into those where you are now?
Yeah. I think the most powerful thing for me was meeting people who were different and were convicted in their authentic self and empowered in that and showed me that that was possible and that was powerful. And, you know, like at that point, it was like the era of social media. And I remember once reading some post or quote from somebody, and I don't remember who it was, but it was a queer person basically talking about the importance of like owning your queer and especially trans identity, regardless of what it looks like, because you never know who you will be a role model for. And at that time, I had gone back to school. I was living in New York City and I was working as a climbing coach on the side. And I had a number of queer kids on my climbing team. And I realized how powerful it was for me to sit in and be vocal about my queer identity, to own and vocalize using they, them pronouns, and to be a role model. And I saw the effects of it. And that like deeply touches you. And it allowed me, I think, to ultimately like come into myself because I had been struggling with it and still do in many ways. But to see the ways in which showing up as myself gave other people, especially like younger folks, permission to show up as themselves. Like my climbing team was like the first place a couple of these kids came out and like asked to use chosen names or asked to use pronouns. And like that's a really powerful experience.
Yeah. That's quite the journey from mean girl to where you got to.
Totally.
I'm wondering, like, what are the shoulds that weigh on you now?
That's a great question. I mean, I think I've thought about it a lot, like going through like a second, or you could even say like third career change. Like I tried to do fashion and art. I like worked for a bridal designer for a while. I was like, nope, that's not what I want. Transitioned into working in sustainability for almost a decade for the fashion industry. And I got to a point where I was really chronically ill. I couldn't work full time. And I was like forced to slow down and reflect on my life and be like, what do I want? And how do I return to a place of balance internally and externally? And that's what ultimately inspired me to go back to school to become a therapist and work with folks who are also ultimately trying to deconstruct what they were told about how relationships, intimacy, sexuality should look and find their true authentic self. And it's hard because like I think even being self-aware of the importance of that journey, having gone through it myself, like there are still shoulds in my life, right? There's the like, well, shouldn't I have my life more quote unquote figured out now that I am older? Like I think I was really lucky because my parents had me when they were 39 and my dad went to med school when he was 39. So I grew up with an example that you can change your career path late in life and you can be on a different timeline than kind of what is conventional for a lot of folks. But I think despite that, there was still a lot of internal pressure that I had just from myself to be successful and to figure my life out, so to speak, earlier than that. And there was a little bit of that, I think, residually in choosing to change paths. I think I had had enough time to grow to be like, no, I'm okay. Like, I'm gonna be okay. But I think I feel it the most probably from like a financial standpoint of being like, oh my God, like I'm starting from ground zero again.
Yeah.
Shouldn't I like not be doing that again?
No, I completely understand that. I mean, this is definitely my 3rd career as an adult, so I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm wondering, like, when you feel like when those shoulds come up, like, where do you feel that physically or emotionally in your body?
That's a great question. I like love it too, like coming from like the therapy training world, right? Like I feel a lot of any of my like negative emotions, stress, anxiety, like in my chest, in my throat, sometimes in my stomach. Um, but I have been experiencing a lot of chronic back pain over the last couple of months and having trained as a dancer, like I know that my back has gone through a lot of strain over the years and pain and problems like creep up as you start to get older. But I also think that there is like root stress, root trauma like going on in my body that is being felt in my low back. And depending on the philosophy you come from, like your root chakra, like that's your root center. It's how you ground, it's your sense of stability and security. And so to go through a significant life transition where you are uprooting, where you are transitioning, where security is not felt, where financial security is not felt, right? Like all of those things, it makes sense that I'm actually feeling that somatically in that part of my body instead of as much like in other like chakra centers or different parts.
Yeah. Yeah, that would make sense. Before we go, um, kind of playing it forward for people, like I said, there's gonna be a playlist. So we shared like the icebreaker, which is always a lot of fun. What's a song right now that you think people should listen to and why?
Mm. Yeah. This is a song I have loved for a while now. It's called Kin, like Kin by Tourist. And it's just like an incredibly beautiful song. It's like an instrumental piece of music and I find it like blends like melancholy with hopeful, with sadness, with joy. We didn't really talk about this at all, but like I also trained as a contemporary dancer and dancing is the way that I root if I can't be outside. And this is like one of those songs that I could always dance to because it has so much like emotional complexity and depth in it. And I just think it's such a beautiful song.
That's awesome. Are there any other shoulds for people listening that they should be doing?
um, I think that like the biggest thing that I keep coming back to that I think is like ultimately informing a lot of my work is this question of like, where is the should coming from? Right. And pulling back those layers. And that's the guiding point that I keep going back to. And so would be the thing that I would like leave people with because I think that sometimes we are like completely unaware that a socialized should is even there.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Shep, thank you so much for being part of this podcast. I really appreciated your time today.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was a blast.
You've been listening to I Feel Like I Should. More at ifeellikeishould.com and on Instagram at I Feel Like I Should Pod. I'll see you next time.